the majority of change initiatives fail.
Hmm.
Fail to achieve their original intended objectives.
And is that a mindset or just they just don't know? Like when you think about leadership,
They generally don't know.
Okay.
They haven't been schooled in it in the same way they have in basic business practices in a current state environment.
Right.
They need to be schooled in these practices in the same way. And that's what we're attempting to do.
And does that journey idea, does that apply just to like an organization or an entity, or does an individual go through that as well?
Think about well, the organization's experience is the sum of the individual experience. Organizational experience is nothing more than the expression of cumulative individual experience. So it starts there. It originates there. It originates in the experience of every individual and how that in combination results in an organizational experience. We often see the organizational effect, don't understand the root source of it is in the individual experience.
Okay. So that education or knowledge of that it exists, and then a way to get through that and understanding that. What do you see as like the biggest issue with leadership when you're entering in, and here we're going through a change or about to go through a change? What's the biggest hiccup you see with leadership besides understanding that it's a journey? Is there something that comes to mind?
There's a principle we talk about in the session called transition misalignment. Leaders who bring us in are typically the same people who made the original decision that we needed this change.
Okay.
They're the same people who have already calculated the benefit to the organization and to them personally in implementing this change. They are leaders who already understand and have control over their role and their future in the context of this change.
Okay.
And they bring us in and we try to help them understand you ain't the rest of your organization and they aren't you.
Okay.
Yeah. They don't have control. They were not involved in the decision. They don't understand how it's going to affect them. They're not even sure they have a future.
Right.
You have all of that. You're already at what we call the new beginning of the change. They're way back in the ending phase of the change. The typical senior leader does not get that. They might intellectually immediately understand your point, but they don't think like that.
Right.
And so helping them think in a way they typically haven't had to think, that it's about not them coming to you, but you going to them.
Wow.
That's probably the biggest single thing we encounter as a general theme across this topic.
So Bob, you talk a lot about the power of communication, and there are misconceptions that go with that. And specifically, what impacted me was this once isn't enough idea. So can you talk about that and maybe give us an example of that?
Well, as I said, when people first hear of change who are not in control of it, they are often affected emotionally in a way that has a how is this going to impact me personally reaction. And so when the organization tries to speak to the business reasons for the change, they're not processing that. They're not hearing that. They're looking for evidence of how this is going to affect me personally. And that's not selfish. That's human nature. It's a survival instinct to think like that. But leaders don't take that into account in their communication. And even if they did, their attempt to speak to that in one attempt is not enough, because the individual is processing this communication, this information they're receiving through that emotional filter. And the consequence is it gets distorted, parts of it get lost, and it even gets misunderstood. In fact, I've heard many leaders complain about how he thought they understood, but apparently they didn't get it. I've heard that many times, and I have to help them understand what we just said. So it's a common phenomenon. So the consequence of that is you need to be very intentional and proactive about expecting to communicate the same information multiple times and in multiple different ways through multiple media options. And one of those is what we refer to as cascading communication. It's one thing for the senior leadership at the top to communicate out the message of change. Where it really takes hold is the repetition of what was presented in the context of smaller meetings, departmental meetings, team meetings, and even one-on-one meetings. And the ideal approach is for that to cascade downward naturally. So if a group of vice presidents was on the receiving end of this message, they go back and meet with their departments, their VPs of a department, they meet with their department heads and have a conversation together about how does this relate to us? What are our questions about it? How do we feel about it? And then those leaders in turn go to their teams and so on down the organization. That is a common and very effective communication strategy that satisfies the multiple times, multiple different ways requirement.
So, Bob, you talk a lot about this idea of how important it is during change that people need a safety net.
Yeah.
And that the leaders don't just provide a safety net, they are a safety net.
Right.
Will you talk about that?
Well, it's a psychological safety net is what I'm referring to, obviously. And where does that come from? If I have that psychological need, what is the source of it? Well, it's natural that the most potentially most effective source is my authority figure, the person that I look to in authority for, frankly, my well-being in general as it relates to my employment with the organization. So to the degree that's true, I need that person to represent certain kinds of support to me that reassures me of my safety. Now, that is not to say that a leader should make promises they can't keep. A leader should not say, oh, don't worry, this won't affect you, or your job's fine, when that may or may not be true. What's important is that that person feel like that their experience is understood, that they are not crazy for how they feel, that they personally are of value and have potential regardless of what the outcome of this change may be as it relates to them. And they need to be told as much as you can tell them about what's happening and any questions they have. Those and other behaviors coming from that authority figure provide me that psychological safety net. I can't hardly get it anywhere else, because that's the source of what's happening to me is my authority. And I need that safety net as an experience. Otherwise, I'm on my own, so to speak.
I guess you can't be a very good safety net if you're not there. And I think one of the humorous things you said is that most, you see it, is that they duck out when there's change. A lot of the higher up leadership's like, I'm just going to be absent.
Yeah, they don't even necessarily realize they're doing it, but they maybe kind of close their door. They don't have the same open door policy they might typically have. Or they might take that trip out to the West Coast to visit our location out there, or maybe they take a day off or a vacation week or whatever. The point being that in any effort to avoid dealing with the natural chaos that comes from the introduction of a change, any effort to avoid that is obvious to everybody. And it just compounds that sense of anxiety and uncertainty, and even to a great extent cynicism in the organization.
Yeah, you talk about all change has loss.
Exactly.
And never look at it that way, because especially if the leadership is one that came up with this amazing, innovative change, they're hopeful, they're excited, they're looking at what's coming.
They're not looking at the loss. And I don't mean that critically. It's natural. First, like I've said, they're in control. Therefore, the loss as it relates to them personally generally isn't going to be that big a concern, in the same way it would be for an employee who didn't make a decision, has no control over it, and doesn't know how it's going to affect them.
And just give a quick definition of what do you mean by loss when you think about change like that?
Well, by definition, anytime there's change, there's loss. Whatever was is no more. That's the very nature of change. Think about it. Whatever was is no more, because change caused that to happen. Okay? So whatever was is a loss. It may be in the minds of those who orchestrated it a very good loss, but it may or may not be that in the minds of everyone. Okay? And even in good change, even in change I would regard as good, I'm going to experience loss. And if I'm not conscious that that's going to occur, those emotions and the effect of them are going to sneak up on me in ways that are going to even surprise me.